Okay. So the next poem is Sailing to Byzantium. And then Beowulf, and then anything can happen. So it's quite a long, it's quite a long reading. All right. So Sailing to Byzantium was Yeats' poem, which opened probably his most famous poetry volume, The Tower.
Right.
It marks a transition in his career from his love poetry and his nature poetry to much more deeply philosophical poetry, and poetry reflecting man and man's journey through history and connection with the universe. So Sailing to Byzantium. That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh or fowl, commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of an aging intellect. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, Pern in Gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fasten to a dying animal, it knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. Out of nature I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. And Beowulf is a poem which sort of reflects a little bit our current crisis. Beowulf was an 8th or 9th century Anglo-Saxon poem about a possibly mythological or imagined situation in Denmark. And Denmark had reached the pinnacle of its civilization and prosperity, the greatest economy ever.
That's why we want to buy Greenland.
And the Halfdane, who is the head of who's the king at the time, builds a great hall to celebrate this new found prosperity. Brings craftsmen from all over the world, and they sing in this great hall every night about their prosperity and about their great, they brag about their great accomplishments and all that they have achieved and this wonderful, wonderful situation that they have built for themselves. And in the marshes, there's a beast who is ticked off by their bragging and their celebrations and decides, the beast decides they've had enough of it. So they decide they're going to bring it to an end.
And I should say before you start, just for everybody, where the translation you're reading is Seamus Heaney's translation of it.
Seamus Healey did a translation of the Anglo-Saxon poem in 1999.
It's fantastic, and I would advise if you want to buy this second Norton Critical edition is incredible because of the amount of background it has in it, not just, of course, the translation and James notes, a full thing of the context that is cited throughout it, and some of the criticism, some of the papers written about it, including, to begin with, J.R.R. Tolkien's thing on Beowulf. He did a translation as well.
He did. And it was, in fact, it was his translation that inspired Heaney.
Oh, really? Okay.
It was his translation that inspired Heaney, that it was a poetic work, that it was a work of the imagination, not just a recording. And that spurred Heaney on to think it should be translated into a modern language because it still held its relevance to this day. The name of the beast is Grendel, but if we substitute Corona,
oh yeah, okay,
we wouldn't be far. We wouldn't be far off. I won't do that, but
we're going to start at, I think, line 115, correct?
Line 115. So this is they're singing their own praises. They've upset the beast, and the beast is about the prow. So after nightfall, Grendel set out for the lofty house to see how the ringdanes were settling into it after their drink. And there he came upon them, a company of the best, asleep from their feasting, insensible to pain and human sorrow. Suddenly then, the God-cursed brute was creating havoc. Greedy and grim, he grabbed 30 men from their resting places and rushed to his lair. Flushed up and inflamed from the raid, blundering back with the butchered corpses. Then as dawn brightened and the day broke, Grendel's powers of destruction were plain. Their vassal was over. They wept to heaven and mourned under mourning. The mighty prince, the storied leader, sat stricken and helpless, humiliated by the loss of his guard. Bewildered and stunned, staring aghast at the demon's trail in deep distress. He was numb with grief, but got no respite. For one night later, merciless Grendel struck again with more gruesome murders. Malignant by nature, he never showed remorse. It was easy then to meet with a man shifting himself to a safer distance, to bed in the bothies, for who could be blind to the evidence of his eyes, the obviousness of that hall watcher's hate? Whoever escaped kept a weather eye open and moved away. So Grendel ruled in defiance of right, one against all, until the greatest house in the world stood empty, a deserted wallstead. For 12 winters, seasons of woe, the Lord of the Shielding suffered his load of sorrow. And so, before long, the news was known over the whole world. Sad lays were sung about the beset king, the vicious raids and ravages of Grendel, his long and unrelenting feud, nothing but war. How he would never parley or make peace with any Dane, nor stop his death dealing, nor pay the death price. No counsellor could ever expect fair reparation from those rabid hands. All were endangered, young and old were hunted down by that dark death shadow who lurked and swooped in the long nights on the misty moors. Nobody knows where these reavers from hell roam on their errands. So Grendel waged his lonely war, inflicting constant cruelties on the people, atrocious hurt. He took over Heorot, haunted the glittering hall after dark. But the throne itself, the treasure seat, he was kept from approaching. He was the Lord's outcast. These were hard times, heartbreaking for the Prince of the Shieldings. Powerful counsellors, the highest in the land, would lend advice, plotting how best the bold defenders might resist and beat off sudden attacks. Sometimes at pagan shrines, they vowed offerings to idols, swore oaths that the killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. That was their way, their heathenish hope. Deep in their hearts, they remembered hell. The almighty judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high king of the world, was unknown to them. Oh, cursed is he who in time of trouble has to trust his soul in the fire's embrace, forfeiting help. He has nowhere to run. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. So that troubled time continued. Woe that never stopped. Steady affliction for half-day sun. Too hard an ordeal. There was panic after dark. People endured raids in the night, riven by terror. The last poem I'm going to read in this section is a little poem by Seamus Healey, which was commissioned after 9/11. And he translated Horace Ode, Ode 134, written, it was said, after Horace had witnessed thunderstorms emerging from a clear blue sky and wondering if he had not paid adequate attention to the gods. So after 9/11, Heaney did a translation of this. Anything can happen. After Horace, Odes 134. Anything can happen. You know how Jupiter will mostly wait for clouds to gather head before he hurls the lightning? Well, just now he galloped his thunder cart and his horses across a clear blue sky. It shook the earth and the clogged under earth, the river Styx, the winding streams, the Atlantic shore itself. Anything can happen. The tallest towers be overturned, those in high places daunted, those overlooked regarded. Drooped big fortune swoops, making the air gasp, tearing the crest off one, setting it down, bleeding on the next. Ground gives, the heavens' weight lifts up off Atlas like a kettle lid. Capstone shift, nothing resettles right. Telluric ash and fire, spores boil away.
Mm. Wow.
Well, there's a lot for you.
Yeah, there is. There's a lot to a lot to go through on that. Now, the Heaney poems you have, I mean, especially with the whole thing of going from Grendel to the telluric ash at the end of Anything Can Happen, and knowing that the background of that is 9/11. Let me bring it up here again. I mean, we're talking. If I had mentioned before, if we talked before about how Heaney's focus is on those previous poems was very minute and commonplace, the way that poetry had been set in motion in the modernist era. Here you have Jupiter and lightning and the thunder cart and his horses and the river Styx and the Atlantic shore itself and fortune and the well, it's just a lot of big stuff happening. You know, the capstones shifting, the ash from the earth, the fire spores boiling away. And I think that kind of goes, I mean, I can see where that comes definitely with Grendel. I mean, doesn't really say, but isn't Grendel supposed to be a dragon? Or isn't that one of the ways of reading what Grendel was?
Yeah, dragon-esque, like marsh creature. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, but I don't see. Okay, so what is the connection between those two for you and sailing to Byzantium?
What's the connection between those two poems and sailing to Byzantium? Okay. All of these poems, I think, all of these poems comment. It's like Carl Jung said that if you're going to change the world, you have to start with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can only change yourself. So Yeats's poem, That Is No Country for Old Men, could be taken as a backward look at the corpus of all of his work to that point. And I'm turning over literally a new leaf. so he is changing himself, and he is moving away from to being too caught up in instinctual, emotional immediacy, and not divorcing himself from it, certainly, but his poems thereafter are more. That poem is a reflection and a laudation for the achievements of man and the achievements of intellect as it has moved, and the achievements of art. Heaney's poem. Heaney writes a piece on translating. I think it's called translating Horace, and he writes a piece on that poem.
Oh, okay.
And he talks about exactly the same thing. What he's writing about in this poem is, can art stand up? He starts off his piece by talking to two friends who were in Italy at the time of 9/11 and feeling very separated, not being able to get back home because, if you remember, all the planes were stopped for a while, and so they couldn't fly back. And they what they did was they went from one museum to another, trying to see if any of the artwork could speak to them, because they didn't have access to the solace of friends and comfort, a bit like the present time comfort of familiar.
Yeah.
So both those poems are about the capacity of art to stand up to crisis. And the Grendel poem, I think, it speaks for itself, because it speaks to our. It speaks all. It could be written about our crisis. It doesn't take a lot of translation. You don't have to be too metaphorical about it, to see how it accords with what we are going through at the present time. And that knowledge that what we're going through is something that man has been through and endured is one of the things which sustains us through the terrors of it, that it isn't new, that we're not the first to encounter it, that we're equipped, that we're equipped within our connectedness with each other and within our own minds to be able to survive it and get through it.
I had found it interesting, actually, and so in sailing to Byzantium, given what you said about he turning his back on what he thought, if I have this right, about him turning his back purposefully on an old man's way of doing poetry, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think the line consume my heart away, sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal.
Right. Okay. Because so does he see himself? Because at the beginning, the young in another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations. Does he see himself as being part of one of those dying generations, and now he's sailing to Byzantium to find the sages and be young?
I think he sees his poetry as having been part and parcel of the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, dying generations, all their song, the salmon falls. I mean, that's a lot of what he has written about up until that point. um, and I think he's making a change, and I think he's saying that that land that I've inhabited for so long and that I've drawn on for so long is not the land of an older man. But that's not what I should be making the art should be coming from.
That is No Country for Old Men.
No Country for Old Men, which is where the movie title came from.
I think they might have. Well, that's a whole nother discussion. Which I think we should really read Cormac McCarthy for before we go into the movie. But the other thing, so he wrote this as part of. So he said this is like the start of a new direction for him. And this is the name of this publication was The Tower. Is there something, the Tower in the tarot is about the destruction of an edifice where the foundation is rotten. Is that something, is that part of that change? Do you get a sense that he was thinking of that? Because I know that, we've talked before how that Yeats was interested in the tarot and such.
Yeah, and he had built a tower for his young wife. He and his young wife had built a tower which he lived in for about 12 years, lived part of the year in from 1917 until 1929 or thereabouts.
Oh, really?
And it was an old Norman tower, so it was it had the history. It had been built, by the colonizers, and it had been a protection of the colonization of the local people. So the top of the tower did symbolize the colonizers. The base of the tower did symbolize the local people. There is that symbolism to some extent in it, but I don't think that he thought the base of where he was coming from was rotten, or that it's in any way even a criticism of it. I think it's more an acceptance of, his stage in life that he does not. It's the opposite of wanting to be the oldest swinger in town. That rather than stand and wear your tight jeans, you accept. You accept your aging. And so I think Yeats is making a commitment, which he always did. Yeats made and remade himself. It's one of his great strengths, and accepted what was coming at him. And we'll read a little later, Cuchulainn Comforted, which he writes sort of on his deathbed.
Right.
He made drama of whatever stage in life he was in. He lived, he was a dedicated poet or artist who made whatever was in front of him. Whatever dirt was in front of him, he made gold from it. He was an alchemist, and so that's what he's speaking to. And there's a huge amount of alchemy toward the end of the poem, where they're talking about gold, right, and of icons for the emperor to reflect on, and the imagery of the golden icons in the mosaics.
And he's trying to find that integration that he feels he no longer has.
I don't know that he doesn't have it any longer. I don't think there's any despair in it. I think that there's an acceptance in that poem.
Okay.
I don't think it's a criticism of anything. I think it's more just an acceptance of that was my party. Now this is my party.
Okay.
That I celebrated that yesterday. I'm going to celebrate this tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's more what I think it is with them.
Okay.
And it's also, I think, a little bit about, again, I think there's a little criticism of current society that it doesn't value the intellectual and artistic work of the common people in Ireland had taken over the country from the colonizers. It had been reclaimed during that time. He had sat in the Senate for 6 years.
Oh, yes, yeah.
His wisdom was not really well welcomed or integrated into the new state policies and procedures. He really felt he was among shopkeepers, people who counted things rather than thought from an artistic perspective or integrated an artistic perspective. And he would have been riled about that to a certain extent, and you can hear that in it. That is no country for old men, this country that you're now creating. I'm going back to a time, Byzantium. He said in a BBC interview about Byzantium, about this poem, might help answer your question a little bit. In 1931, he wrote it for a BBC broadcast. I am trying to write about the state of my soul, for it is right for an old man to make his soul. And some of my thoughts about that subject I have put into a poem called Sailing to Byzantium. When Irish men were illuminating the Book of Kells and making the jeweled croziers now in the National Museum, Byzantium was the center of European civilization and the source of its spiritual philosophy. So I symbolize the search for the spiritual life by a journey to that city.